History remembers Rome as the eternal city, a civilization of emperors, legions, and unmatched power. But history often forgets what it cannot explain. Behind the marble, the legends, and the victories, there are shadows, and some shadows stretch all the way back to Rome's birth in 753 BC, a beginning soaked not in triumph, but in blood, ritual, and something far darker. The founding of Rome is told as a story of brothers Romulus and Remus, their children, abandoned, raised by a she-wolf, destined to shape the destiny of an empire. Yet, behind this myth, there lies another tale, one that whispers of a secret ritual carried out on the very soil where Rome would rise. A ritual not for the gods of Olympus, but for something older, something forgotten, something cursed. Ancient fragments, rare inscriptions, and forbidden scrolls hint at a chilling truth, that when the first stones of Rome were laid, a child was buried alive beneath them, not as punishment, not as mercy, but as an offering. The priests of that time believed blood would bind the foundations to eternity, and so, beneath the Palatine Hill, the tomb was sealed, not as a resting place of honor, but as a prison meant to keep the dead from walking among the living. But here is the horror that scholars refuse to acknowledge. You can bury the body, but not the voice. Workers spoke of screams in the earth, whispers that turned the air cold, clawing, sounds in the rock as if someone or something was trying to dig their way out. The people were warned, never speak of the tomb, never disturb its silence, never unseal the door. Yet history shows us that Rome was a city of ambition, greed, and defiance. And tombs, especially cursed ones, attract those who believe they are stronger than fear. From kings to emperors, whispers of the cursed tomb endured. Some sought its treasures, some sought its secrets. All found only death, and with each disturbance, the curse spread further into the heart of the city itself, through plague, shadow, and blood. This is not the Rome you learned about in textbooks. This is the Rome that history tried to erase. Tonight, we will open that tomb again. We will walk into the darkness beneath the eternal city and uncover the story buried for nearly 3,000 years. This is the true horror of Rome's birth, the cursed tomb of 753 BC. In the year 753 BC, on the banks of the river Tiber, Rome was nothing more than a dream. A patch of wild earth, scattered tribes, and a story of two brothers destined to carve a city from the soil of blood. Romulus and Remus. The names echo through legend. But what we rarely ask is this: what price was paid for their empire to rise? What shadows were cast in the very moment of Rome's birth? The Romans believed that every city required more than walls and soldiers. To stand for eternity, it needed the favor of the gods. And the gods, as every priest whispered, demanded blood. Sacrifice was the cornerstone of trust between mortals and the divine. Animals were slaughtered, their entrails read like books of prophecy. But in the founding of Rome, an act was performed that even later generations refused to record a ritual. So forbidden, so grotesque. It lived only in whispers. As Romulus laid the first stone of his wall, the priests gathered in silence. A child was brought forward barely 7 years old, chosen not from slaves, but from Rome's own bloodline. He was not to be honored, he was not to be remembered. He was to be buried alive beneath the foundations. The priests chanted, not in Latin, but in a language older, one carried from shadowed lands long before the Romans arrived. The ground shook as the earth swallowed the boy, his cries muffled beneath soil and stone. And with him, the curse was sealed. His spirit was bound, trapped, sacrificed not for glory, but for fear. What did they fear? Some scholars suggest the Etruscan gods, others whisper of forgotten deities, darker than Jupiter or Mars. But the truth is lost in fire and time. What we know is this: the priests left warnings carved in hidden places, fragments later found in ruins. The words are simple, chilling, and unrelenting. Do not open, do not disturb, do not forget the tomb. But human memory is fragile, and power corrupts. As Rome grew from a cluster of huts to the eternal city, few remembered the cries of the boy. Yet his tomb remained, sealed beneath the Palatine Hill, a scar beneath the foundations of empire. To the people, it was sacred ground. To the rulers, it was a temptation. And to the shadows, it was an open wound, waiting to be touched once more. The founding of Rome gave the world an empire. But beneath its stones lay something darker than empire, darker than kings. A curse, living and breathing, entombed in silence, waiting for the day someone dared to break it open. Decades passed. Rome grew from scattered huts into a kingdom of ambition. Its people worshipped gods, built temples, and fought wars to expand their land. But beneath the triumphs of its kings, whispers persisted, rumors of a place no man dared to tread. Beneath the Palatine Hill, where Romulus himself had claimed his throne, lay the sealed tomb. To the priests, it was forbidden ground. To the people, it was cursed earth. And yet, its presence weighed upon the city like a secret heartbeat in the stone. The first signs came not from rulers, but from workers. Men who dug foundations for temples swore they heard voices in the rock. Some spoke of children's cries carried through the earth. Others told of shadows that moved where no torch was lit. One worker claimed his pickaxe struck something hollow like a chamber hidden beneath the soil. When he returned the next day to show his companions, he was gone. His tools lay abandoned, the earth freshly disturbed, but his body was never found. The Senate, fearing unrest, declared the area sacred. Guards were stationed. Priests were ordered to silence rumors. But rumors are rivers. They carve their way into every home, every street corner. Mothers warned their children never to wander near the hill at night. Farmers swore their cattle avoided grazing too close. And yet, figures were seen, shrouded in dirt, wandering the streets after dusk. When confronted, they would vanish into thin air, leaving only footprints in the mud. Small footprints, as if made by a child. Archaeological fragments, discovered centuries later, describe symbols carved into stone blocks, buried deep in the foundations of Rome. They are not Roman, they are not Etruscan, they belong to something older, a language no scholar has fully translated. But one phrase has been deciphered, carved over and over again. He waits. Rome prospered on the surface, but beneath it, something was alive. Something clawed against its prison walls. The priests knew it, which is why they forbade entry. But kings are not priests, and rulers do not fear warnings, written in dust and bone. Where priests saw curses, kings saw opportunity. For what greater prize than a secret sealed at the very birth of Rome? If treasure lay in that tomb, it could belong only to the king, and if power lay within it, perhaps even the gods themselves could be commanded. The tomb had waited since 753 BC, but by the time of Rome's early kings, it was no longer a rumor. It was a temptation, and temptations in Rome were never ignored for long. By the turn of the 6th century BC, Rome had grown from a scattered kingdom into a rising power. Its kings sought monuments, wealth, and immortality. But one king, more than any other, became obsessed with a secret that pulsed beneath his city. Tarquinius Priscus, known to history as the 5th king of Rome, was a man of ambition, cunning, and arrogance. For him, warnings were not barriers, they were invitations. The whispers of the cursed tomb reached his ears. Priests begged him to ignore them. They told him of the cries in the earth, of the warnings carved into stone. But Tarquinius was unmoved. He believed the tomb held treasure artifacts from Rome's founding, power from forgotten gods. To him, curses were nothing but the language of fearful men. And so, in defiance of centuries of silence, he gave the order, break it open. The work began at night. Torches burned low as soldiers and laborers hammered at the earth. Stone was cleared, soil removed, until at last they uncovered the blackened mouth of a chamber sealed with massive slabs. The air grew foul as they worked, thick with the smell of rot. When the final stone cracked, those present swore they heard a sound like a sigh escaping from beneath the hill. A stench followed, choking and unbearable, as though death itself had been trapped for centuries and was now set free. Inside, they found no gold, no treasure. The chamber was bare stone, its walls blackened with soot and strange carvings. In the center lay bones not arranged in burial, but twisted as if the body had struggled in its final moments. Long claw marks scratched the ceiling, gouges left by fingernails worn to the bone. On the floor, a message carved into the rock: "I am not dead. I wait." The soldiers recoiled, but Tarquinius pressed forward. He demanded the bones be examined, the symbols translated, but no priest dared touch them. When one man attempted to lift the skull, it crumbled into ash at his touch, releasing a gust of foul wind that extinguished the torches. In the darkness, they swore they heard breathing faint, childlike, and close. Within days, the city began to suffer. Food spoiled in storage. Fires broke out without cause. Children fell sick, waking in the night, screaming of a voice calling them underground. Livestock were found drained of blood, their carcasses left without a single wound. And always, citizens, whispered of figures wandering the forum at night, shrouded in dirt, faces pale, eyes hollow. Tarquinius, defiant as ever, dismissed it as superstition, but even in his palace, he could not escape the curse. His guards abandoned their posts after hearing laughter in the dark. His wife claimed to feel a child's hand clutch her arm in the night, and in his dreams, Tarquinius himself heard a voice small, desperate, yet filled with rage. "You opened the door." Rome had broken the seal. The tomb was no longer silent. The curse was awake. What followed the opening of the tomb was not immediate destruction, but something far worse: slow corruption. At first, it was dismissed as coincidence. A handful of children grew pale and feverish. A few livestock were found bloodless in the fields. But within weeks, the city began to rot from the inside out. Rome, still in its infancy, was drowning in shadows. The plague began with whispers. Citizens claimed they heard voices in the dark, calling from beneath their homes. Families awoke to scratching at their doors, soft at first, then furious, as though fingernails raked across the wood. In the mornings, they found the marks carved deep into the grain, but no footprints leading away. Those who lived nearest the Palatine Hill reported hearing weeping at night, a child's cry echoing through the stone foundations, traveling across the earth. No matter how far they moved, the sound followed them. Then came the sickness. It spread not like any ordinary disease. Physicians found no wounds, no explanation. Children would laugh and play one day, only to collapse lifeless the next. Their faces pale, their eyes glassy, their lips whispering words in a language no one recognized. Entire households were emptied within days. The priests began burning the bodies, but the smoke carried with it an even greater fear, for within the flames witnesses swore they saw faces, screaming faces of children clawing at the fire as if trying to escape. Livestock died in droves, their carcasses found stiff, bloodless, their eyes wide with terror. Farmers claimed they saw shadows moving through their fields, crawling on all fours, vanishing before they reached them. Some said these shadows were small, childlike, with arms too long and mouths that opened wider than any humans should. Panic gripped the people. The Senate demanded answers. Priests claimed the curse had awakened, that the sacrifice buried at the city's birth had risen from its prison. They spoke of the tomb being unsealed, of Tarquinius's arrogance. They begged him to act, but the king dismissed them still. To him, Rome could not bow to superstition. Yet even in his defiance, he began to fear the night. His palace was haunted by sounds. No guard could explain small footsteps in the halls. childish laughter echoing in the chambers, cold hands brushing against his skin as he slept. Soon the city itself began to decay. Wells turned foul, filled with a stench of rot. Fires consumed homes, but the flames burned cold, leaving walls blackened as if touched by something unnatural. Citizens fled the city, abandoning their homes in terror. Rome, the city destined for eternity, was at risk of ending before it truly began. The people cried for salvation. They demanded sacrifice, and the priests, desperate and trembling, answered with a decree darker than the curse itself. To contain the shadow, Rome would have to feed it. When fear swallows a city, desperation soon follows. Rome, once a proud kingdom, was now a city of whispers and shadows. Each night, more families vanished. Each morning, new claw marks scarred the wooden doors of homes. The priests knew the truth. The curse could not be undone. It could only be fed. And so, they decreed a ritual so horrifying, it was spoken of only in trembling voices for generations after. The king resisted at first, but as his guards deserted him, as his own wife fell into fevered madness, muttering in her sleep about a child standing at her bedside, eyes hollow, Tarquinius gave his reluctant approval. 100 lives were demanded, not in battle, not by justice, but as sacrifice. Rome would bleed to silence the curse it had awakened. The prisoners were the first to be chosen criminals, thieves, and slaves. Bound in chains, they were led to the Forum, where an altar had been erected beneath the open sky. Citizens crowded in silence, their faces pale, their eyes wide with dread. Some wept openly, others prayed, but none dared to leave. For the priests had declared, if the city will not feed the tomb will feed on the city. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the ritual began. Torches lined the square, casting long shadows across the stone. The priests chanted in that same forgotten tongue, their voices trembling but unwavering. One by one, the prisoners were dragged forward. Their throats were cut, their blood spilling onto the stones, running in rivulets toward the earth. The screams echoed against the marble walls, carried through the streets, searing themselves into memory. Mothers covered their children's eyes, but nothing could block the sound. Rome was drowning in death. Witnesses swore that with each sacrifice, the air grew colder. The torches dimmed. Some claimed they saw shadows writhing in the blood, shapes twisting, forming the outline of a small figure. By the 50th body, the crowd murmured that the weeping had stopped. By the 100th, silence fell across the Forum. For the first time in months, the city was still. The priests declared the ritual a success. The curse, they said, was fed and contained. The tomb would be sealed again, this time with molten lead poured into its cracks, and sacred fire lit above it. Rome would rise again, free from the shadow. Yet even in their triumph, fear lingered. For some in the crowd swore they still heard it. Faint and distant, the cry of a child beneath the earth. Not in anger, not in rage, but in hunger. The blood had bought Rome a reprieve, but curses are never truly satisfied. They wait, they whisper, and they remember. Rome did not fall that night. The city survived, rebuilt, and grew into the empire we read about today. But the story of the tomb, the plague, and the sacrifice was never told in the official histories. Not because it was forgotten, but because it was erased. The Romans were masters of conquest, of politics, of building monuments that outlived their makers, but they were also masters of silence. What threatened the image of eternity was buried as deeply as the tomb itself. In the centuries that followed, scrolls that once described the curse vanished from archives. Records of mass sacrifices were destroyed or rewritten as victories of war. Priests who dared whisper the truth were silenced. Even the Senate refused to speak of the events, declaring the tomb a matter closed. By the time the Republic rose, the cursed child had become a ghost story told only in hushed tones to frighten children. a story that respectable historians dismissed as superstition. But superstitions are rarely born from nothing. Fragments remain. In hidden ruins beneath the Palatine Hill, archaeologists in later centuries discovered stones scorched by unnatural fire, walls etched with claw marks, and human bones, small, fragile, unmistakably those of children buried where no graves should be. These findings were quietly catalogued, then locked away. The official narrative of Rome's founding could not allow space for curses and shadows, but the evidence was there, waiting for those who chose to look closely enough. Legends whispered through time, shifting like smoke. Some said the tomb had been opened again during the reign of later kings, unleashing fresh waves of misfortune. Others claimed the emperors themselves performed secret rituals to keep the curse contained. And still others believe that when Rome finally fell, when its empire crumbled into ashes, it was not the barbarians who struck the final blow, but the curse beneath its foundations, claiming the city that had dared disturb its eternal rest. Even today, the story lingers in strange ways. Tourists in Rome speak of cold spots near the Palatine Hill, where the air chills even in the heat of summer. Workers restoring ancient tunnels report sounds of crying in the dark. Some researchers quietly, cautiously admit that there are sealed chambers beneath the city that have never been opened. Their entrances blocked by stone, their locations marked on no public map. What lies within them remains unknown. But if the warnings carved into the rock are true, then perhaps silence is safer than discovery. Rome built its empire on conquest, discipline, and blood, but its greatest secret was always beneath its feet. A tomb not meant to honor the dead, but to keep something imprisoned. Something that, even now, after nearly 3,000 years, may still be waiting, watching, and hungering. History tells us Rome was eternal. It rose from the mud of the Tiber to dominate the world, shaping laws, culture, and civilization itself. But eternity has a price. And perhaps the true foundation of Rome was not strength or glory, but fear. Fear bound in blood. Fear sealed in stone. Fear that even now, nearly 3,000 years later, refuses to be silenced. The story of the cursed tomb does not appear in the polished histories of emperors and scholars. It does not appear in the speeches of senators or in the pages of textbooks. It lingers instead in fragments in half-burned scrolls, in forbidden inscriptions, in rumors whispered by priests who knew better than to speak aloud. It exists in the silence between words, in the deliberate gaps where history chose to look away. For what empire wishes to be remembered, not for triumph, but for terror? What city calls itself eternal if its eternity is chained to the bones of a sacrificed child? And yet, we return to the same questions that haunted the workers, the priests, and the kings. Was the tomb truly sealed? Did the rituals of blood and fire keep the curse contained, or only feed it? When Rome burned under Nero, when plagues swept through the empire, when emperors fell one after another to betrayal and madness, were these the ordinary tragedies of history, or were they echoes of the curse, reaching up from the depths of the Palatine Hill? Perhaps the greatest horror is not that the curse destroyed Rome, but that it survived it. In the ruins beneath the eternal city, there are still sealed chambers, places even modern archaeologists will not open, places where claw marks still scar the stone, where bones rest in silence, where the air hangs heavy with the weight of something waiting. Some who have entered these tunnels speak of sudden chills, of whispers in languages they cannot understand, of shadows that move without light. Most never speak of it at all, and perhaps that silence says more than words ever could. So remember, this history is not only what we are told, it is also what we are not allowed to know. Rome's greatness is undeniable, but so too are its secrets. And secrets, like tombs, do not stay buried forever. One day, whether by curiosity, greed, or accident, the sealed chamber may be opened again. And when that happens, The Curse of Rome will not be a story of the past. It will be a story of the present. The eternal city was built on blood. The only question left is, how much more blood will it demand?